Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Today is Thursday, October 6th, 2016, and I'm here at the Law Library in City Hall in Newton, Massachusetts with Robert Paul Whitten, known as Bob, and together we are participating in the Newton Talks Oral History Project that is being conducted with the Newton Free Library, Historic Newton, and the Newton Senior Center. I'd like to start by asking you some questions.
Sure.
Uh, what is your connection to Newton?
I resided in Newton. I've resided in Newton for probably 35 years, um, and in two locations in Newton.
Okay. And what were you doing before you entered the service?
I was in law school.
Okay. And where were you stationed? Uh,
Well, I was in law school at Boston College Law School. I
okay.
had been in the ROTC at Boston College. I got out of Boston College in 1962, out of the law school in 65. I hadn't served on active duty after my commissioning in 1962. The government sent me notification that I was being ordered to active duty, and I was first sent down to Fort Gordon, Georgia. I was in the Signal Corps, and I was sent down there for the basic officer school. At the conclusion of my basic officer training, you get an assignment of where you're going to go next. That assignment happened to be to the Schenectady Army Depot in Schenectady, New York. I was trained as a Signal Corps officer. I went there as a chief transportation officer at the depot, something totally outside of my training. And I was there for 6 or 7 months. And then I got a set of orders ordering me down to the Pentagon because they needed somebody to do actually three things. One, to rewrite the Army Life Insurance Program as part of a study group. That was number one. Number two was to participate in the Cuban officer United States Army program that they had for the Cuban officers who were landed at the Bay of Pigs and were subsequently interned as prisoners of war. And the third thing was to rewrite the Army personnel program, a thing called RAPIDS, which was Random Access Information Disseminator System. They've got an acronym for everything that they do. So that's what I was down there for. At that point, I was a first lieutenant. I came out of going on active duty. I was a second lieutenant. After 2 days down in Fort Gordon, Georgia, they discovered I should have been a first lieutenant, even though I wasn't in the Judge Advocate General School. So I was made a first lieutenant. Then I went to Schenectady as a first lieutenant. I went down to the Pentagon, and I was the lowest ranking officer in the entire wing of the Pentagon that I was in. So they promoted me to a captain, and I stayed that way until I got out.
Did you choose that specific branch, the Signal Corps, or were you assigned?
No, I didn't ask for the Signal Corps. I was assigned that.
Okay. And how did you adapt to military life? That could include the physical regimen, the barracks, the food, the social life, anything.
I'm kind of a odd duck in that regard. I adapted very, very well because number one, nobody was shooting at me. Number two, I wasn't living in a tent. And number three, I had very comfortable living conditions. And I was free actually as a bird. I mean, at 5 o'clock at night, I was on my own, and I didn't start till 7 o'clock the next morning. So it wasn't that you were hearing all kinds of stuff at night. I mean, I lived in a private apartment from the Pentagon. I lived at Southern Towers, and it's the Schenectady Army Depot. I had my own apartment right on the depot. Down at Fort Gordon, Georgia, I was in a bachelor officer's quarters, but because I was a first lieutenant, I had a living room, a very small kitchen, and a good-sized bedroom and a balcony. So, I did all right.
Good. How did you stay in touch with family and friends back home?
Well, that was easy because whenever I wanted to fly back home, I did. I didn't have to work on the weekends. Nobody was calling me on the weekends. And I just fly. And at that point, if you flew in uniform, you flew at 50% of the cost of the flight. And they always managed, for one way or another, they always managed to find a seat in first class for you. So it was good. My relatives came down to Washington fairly frequently because they liked Washington. There's a lot to see there. And so it really wasn't a bad transition.
Okay. Was your family based in Boston?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. They were based in Chelsea.
Okay.
Then they subsequently all moved to Newton.
Okay. Do you remember arriving and what it was like at the different places where you served?
Yeah, very vividly. I had to go to Fort Gordon, Georgia again for basic officers school. I'd been in law school for 3 years. I hadn't donned a uniform in 3 years. I didn't have a uniform at that particular point because they had changed the way the uniforms looked. So, I mean, I arrived at Fort Gordon, Georgia, just dressed as a civilian. Of course, you're not supposed to do that. But I had an excuse. You know, once I got there, I then went out and bought a uniform and all of that. Several uniforms. Yeah, I remember that vividly. Again, at Schenectady, it was totally different. I had a uniform and I arrived in a formal and proper manner.
Okay. And how about the Pentagon?
The Pentagon, yeah, in a formal manner that lasted about 1 day. At that particular point, they were having massive demonstrations against the war, and we all wore civilian clothes. Mm-hmm. I had an office, and the only way that you would know that I was in the Army was it said Captain Whitten at the front of there was a little name tag on the front of that thing. But no, we never wore a uniform. The only time I wore a uniform was to get promoted, to go to somebody's promotion party, at a Christmas party, and to fly back and forth to home. But you couldn't wear a uniform down there. I mean, people would raise hell with you.
Interesting. Tell me about a few of your most memorable experiences, positive or negative, during your time of service.
Again, I'm odd in that regard that I can't remember anything that was negative. I can remember positive, waking up in the middle of the night to a telephone call. At that time I could hear the phone. I wasn't deaf. And I picked up the phone. You know, he said hello. And the phone on the other end was my immediate superior, who was a major general. And he said, Bob, I'd get everybody in the office. He said the Egyptian-Israeli conflict has broken out. He said, and we've got to go in there because he said, we've got men on both sides. We've got representatives of the United States Army in the Egyptian side, and we've got representatives in the Israeli side. So he said, we've got to get in and manage this thing. And I think we were in there 3 or 4 days without sleep or doing anything else. I mean, you just had to get those guys the hell out of there.
Wow.
Schenectady was different. Schenectady was really an outpost, and I was on as a duty officer at night, and one of the people came in and he had a fax from Washington D.C. that a soldier had been killed in Vietnam, and we had to go out and tell the mother and the father and the family and notify them of that fact. And those instructions, you've got to get dressed in your dress blues, you've got to have a driver, you've got to know your way around. We went to the police station, and somebody knew the mother and father, so they brought us directly to the house. They told us that they were a religious family, so we got the minister that they were involved. And of course we went up, I rang the bell. The mother came to the door, saw me, saw the minister, passed dead away. And but we had to stay there and make sure the body was okay and everything.
Wow, it's hard.
That was tough.
Yeah.
I can't think of any other thing.
Okay. Do you recall the day your service ended?
I do very, very vividly because, again, my boss, who was a major general at that time, tried to get me to stay. He said, "You're a captain now." He said, "I'll make you a major." He said, "Just stay." He said, "We'll give you a command position in Vietnam." And I said to him very frankly, I said, "Sorry, appreciate that very much. I want to go back to Chelsea." And I'm sure if he knew where Chelsea was, he'd say, "Why the hell? What's wrong with this guy?" But yeah, they wanted me to stay. And if I had stayed, I had some people that I graduated with that stayed in. One's a lieutenant general. I mean, they really did well. But I didn't. I opted to go back home, and the rest is history.
What was it like to return to civilian life?
Well, again, I had a background as a lawyer. It was good. I wanted to find a job. I found a job very easily, and unlike today for young lawyers, but it wasn't that much different, again, because we were in an environment where you're not intense. You're in offices. You know, the 2 years I was there, I was in an office almost continually. So then to get out, it was just a different change of offices. I mean, so yeah, it wasn't much of a hassle. I had one health problem with high blood pressure, and I got that treated at the VA, and still get that treated today.
Okay. How did your service and experiences affect your life and your outlook on war and the military in general?
Well, war is really a necessary evil, unfortunately. But how did it affect me in terms of life? Yeah, you had a certain discipline that was both imposed upon you and discipline that you imposed upon you from the outside, and discipline that you imposed upon yourself from inside. And you had an assignment, you had to get it done, and you had to do whatever it took to get something done. And that type of thing has stayed with me all through life. And you care about your fellow associates, because in a military situation, I mean, you could be ordered to the front somewhere, and you're depending on these guys to cover you, and they're depending on you to cover them. And then leadership skills. I mean, you've got to motivate the people that are underneath you to do what a lot of people would regard as impossible tasks. I mean, it had to be awful. I mean, I was the point person for the President of the United States at the Department of Army for these Cuban officer program, for these Cuban officers, and they were getting shot up to beat the band in Vietnam. And of course, you get a different story. You'd hear the President of the United States in an address to the people would say, "We don't have any people in North Vietnam," and yet we would get the medical reports, the action reports, and they wouldn't put where they were, but they had the coordinates on the map. Well, you can read a map, you look at the map, and it was outside of Hanoi. Well, what do you mean? You couldn't get more North Vietnam than that? But yeah.
What would you like people to know 100 years from now?
That it was a distinct honor and a privilege for me to serve. And I think it's a valuable service for anybody, male or female.
Okay. It looks like our time is just about up.
Okay.
Is there one more thing you haven't covered about your service?
Yeah, I'll go back to the Cuban officer thing. One of the highlights of my career was that I represented the President of the United States at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier when they had the anniversary of the Bay of Pigs. And that was unbelievable. I mean, you've got guards all around you, they're carrying the bouquet back, and you're marching in. It was on television, it was quite a thing. But that was a high point, too.
Who was the president then?
The president then was Lyndon Johnson,
okay.
and I reported to his special assistant was a gentleman by the name of Joseph Califano.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
taking the time to do this with us. We're really happy to be able to include you in the Newton Talks Oral History Project.
Okay. Now, is there anything you want me to